October usage stats just dropped, and while nothing is going to happen because now we're not doing usage-based shifts every month, people are still interested in tracking general trends, and so there's always a question of what could have been if we were to have shifted this month. And you can see some of these here. These are all specifically mons that would have moved in or out of a new, not real tier called Sub-Zero used. You know, at this point we have so many Pokemon, even with Dex and all that, that people are making new tiers up even below ZU, which was already an unofficial tier below PU. And I don't really see these tiers becoming that official anytime soon because nobody plays them. You know, nobody plays NU, or RU even. Well, who's gonna play ZU? And so why do I need to play SU? That's neither here nor there. Point is, here are some of the Pokemon that could have fallen to SU. And what that means is that this Pokemon is so bad, it's so unviable, that not even ZU will take it. And we're talking Pokemon like Articuno, Cryogonal. I'm surprised to see Cryogonal down this low, because it is a Rapid Spinner. And there are so many tiers that need Rapid Spinners. I'm even thinking NU. NU's in dire straits right now. And, you know, you got this Rapid Spinner right here. Why don't we snap that up? Well, there are various reasons for that. Cryogonal is not the best Pokemon, but it does still have that. Same with Hitmonlee. Surprised to see these both dropping. Hitmonlee especially because it's got the grassy terrain support, or electric terrain, depending on how you want to run it. Sableye isn't too surprising. Prankster is not what it once was. Snorlax is extremely surprising because, I mean, that Pokemon was banned from NU at a point. I don't actually believe it should have been banned from NU. That's my personal opinion. I think it was always manageable. But, I mean, it was doing pretty decently there for a while. And now it's all the way down in SU, apparently. Or would be if we were to shift things. So that shows how little usage it's seeing. I think that's somewhat disrespectful to Snorlax. Let's talk about Virizion, though. As you know, that's the point of the video. You clicked on the thumbnail, you saw we're talking about Virizion. Virizion is a sad Pokemon. It always hasn't been very good. Interestingly, when the Pokemon first dropped in the DLC, it was Terrakion that got the most jokes about it. Terrakion fell all the way down to the bottom of the tier list. It had the lowest usage out of all of the returning Pokemon. People were using Regigigas more than they were using Terrakion. In most part, that was because Terrakion had Iron Boulder that just came back, and why would I use Terrakion when I could use Iron Boulder? Whereas Iron Leaves had come out a bit before in a raid drop, as opposed to coming out in the Crown Tundra. Well, not in the Crown Tundra, the whichever DLC that was, right? DLC 2. So people had already gotten over Iron Leaves, but Iron Boulder, ooh, that's the new monster. Nobody used Terrakion, but even Virizion fell down, I think, to at least NU, if not PU, because it wasn't really that good. Nobody really wanted to use it. So let's talk about where all of the Swords of Justice are. So Keldeo is comfortably in UU. That's where it's been for at least since Gen 8, maybe Gen 7 even. Gen 6 it was OU, but it's not too bad in UU. If you're in UU, you're still a respectable Pokemon at this point. So you got that. Terrakion is an RU, which actually is sort of baffling to me, because we saw when Terrakion dropped down to ZU, it was getting walled by Dipplin. But of course, not all Pokemon can beat Dipplin, and it does have pretty good breaking power. So just because it did fall down there doesn't necessarily mean the Terrakion is all that bad. It just has an unreliable Stone Edge, and if it got Mighty Cleave, I think Terrakion would easily be a UU Pokemon, because Rock and Fighting are two good offensive typings, and it does have Sword Stance, and so, you know, it's not bad. Cobalion is UU. Cobalion has always been a UU or RU level Pokemon. It's pretty weak, but it has fantastic typing and great support moves, as well as a few other options that it can play around with, be it Z moves or whatnot, to give it the extra oomph it needs to hang. And being in UU isn't too surprising. I wouldn't be surprised to see it drop to RU if the player base decides that its utility is not that valuable, but it's too valuable otherwise to be anywhere below RU, for sure. And if we compare Cobalion and Virizion, they actually have pretty similar stat lines. They both have the same 108 base speed, and then they just swap their defenses with the 90 base attack stats, right? So you compare that to this, we got the 90 and the 90, and then their defenses are just swapped, and that's the only difference between them in terms of stats. So if Cobalion is a solid UU or maybe RU Pokemon, then what is Virizion doing down here? And for the most part, Virizion's shortcomings comes down to its typing. Grass fighting is not bad, but you have to do something with it. And today's video, we're going to break down what failings Virizion has in that department and how it compares to other grass fighting and of course grass fighting types, as well as to its brethren. So steel typing, of course, fantastic. Means you're not weak to fairy, gives you an immunity to poison, and it's just all around really nice. Of course, Lucario isn't necessarily known for being a defensive Pokemon, but I would compare Cobalion more to Empoleon, where it uses its steel typing defensively while using its other typing as its more offensive type, right? Empoleon uses its water moves more frequently than it uses its steel moves. And I would say Cobalion is maybe a bit more 50-50, but it definitely likes to use its Phytinium Z Focus Blast. Nowadays it gets Aura Sphere, and it uses Close Combat when it's using the physical sets to great effect. You also have Volt Switch, sort of similar to how Empoleon has Flip Turn, and they both have Stealth Rock. If Cobalion had Roost or something, it would be even better. But I still don't think it would be OU just because it doesn't have that power or defensive level like it does in OU. And Keldeo, on the other hand, has a really high special attack stat. So it's a good offensive Pokemon, and that's the same as Terrakion. But Terrakion has a high physical attack stat, and they all have the same exact speed stat, which is a respectable speed stat. You're above 100, but it isn't, wowing anybody nowadays in the higher tiers. So in terms of stat lines, compared to all of his brethren, Virizion actually is just exactly the same as all of them. Its SPDF stat of 129 could have been an attacking stat, but Keldeo had the special attack and Terrakion had the attack stat. And for a grass fighting type, generally speaking, I find that a physical defense is more valuable than a special defense. Just given that you're 4 times weak to flying, and Hurricane is pretty scary. Of course, Blade Bird is also very scary. But Hurricane, Air Slash, things like that. And then you're also weak to Ice, which a lot of times is a special thing. Now let's just look at the grass fighting types to get a quick comparison. So if we look at the grass fighting types, Chestnut has that great defense stat. And if you'll notice, it's a decently high tier. Chestnut has some things that Virizion wishes it has. I would say Spiky Shield is at the top of the list. If you had Spiky Shield on this, it would be better defensively. They both have Synthesis, right? So that's not a problem. Virizion also has Synthesis. And when you look at their stats, 91 versus 88, Virizion's got more HP. And 129 SPDF versus 122, and then the 75 versus 72. So very comparable defensive spread, but then Virizion's got that speed stat. So if we were talking about just raw bulk, Virizion can actually pack on a lot more bulk than Chestnut can. And it will be faster in the end, which is really valuable. But Chestnut is physically bulky, whereas Virizion is especially bulky, and it's just not as valuable to be a SPDF wall as it is to be a physical wall when you're this particular typing. A grass fighting. Okay. We can see a similar thing with Decidueye, Hisui, and it's of course also ZU, so it's not necessarily doing a good job of being physically defensive or physically bulky, and as you can see, it doesn't really have the bulk to speak of, but Breloom is an offensive Pokemon, and so is Lilligant. So they don't have to worry about that. But when we compare Chestnut and Virizion, Virizion just does way worse than Chestnut. The other thing that we have to consider is that Virizion doesn't get spikes, right? And Chestnut is a fantastic spiker. So when you have utility in Chestnut, and you've got the spiky shield, you got Drain Punch, which you don't get that here either. You got Giga Drain, so you could be a special attacking physical wall, right? You can maybe make an argument for that, but I don't think I've ever seen it work out that well. And just what a physical tank can do when you're grass type is a lot more valuable than what a special grass type can do, I think, is the main takeaway for that. Fighting is an awful defensive typing because you are weak to a lot and you don't resist a lot. That's made up for it by the fact that you're good offensively, but defensively not so great. So we just look through here and we look at the physically defensive grass types, because the grass is what you're leveraging to be defensive. At Drapple, it's a physical wall. It can use Assault Vest, but it's mostly going to be physically bulky, and it does a decent job of that. Sinistcha is used defensively, not Spadef. Amoonguss is used physically defensively. Chestnut is used physically defensively. Bramblegast is used physically defensively, not because it has a good defense stat, but because it has strength stat. Vileplume is used physically defensively. Serena is really not used defensively in that same way. And technically, I guess it could be used in both ways, but I would say it's more effective as a Phys-Def tanker rather than a Spadef tanker. Decidueye is usually used more, I don't know if it's used more physically or especially defensively. I'm not sure about Decidueye. Venusaur is used physically defensively, and Wo-Chen is a weird one because it has Tablet of Ruin, so it's going to be used physically defensively, even though its Spadef stat is higher. Appleton is used physically defensively. Arboliva, I feel like, is also used physically defensively usually. Dipplin is used physically defensively. And we're going to ignore Meganium. We're talking about good Pokemon here. So out of these, I guess Toedscruel, maybe. Maybe Toedscruel is one grass type that's more defensive, that's used on the Spadef side rather than the defensive side. We had to make it all the way down to Zeo before we got any of that. If we look at Pokemon that aren't in the game, you have Tangrowth, who is definitely a physically defensive Pokemon. Right? Tangrowth is known for being physically tanky. Ferrothorn, which while it can run Spadef, is definitely more known for being physically tanky. Shiinotic, which is a similar boat to Bramblegast, where because it has Strength Sap, it'll be more physically tanky. Bulu, which is more usually physically tanky, I feel. Eldegoss, also physically tank. And then we got Cap, so that doesn't count. So out of the grass types, if we look at those, they're almost always used physically defensively, not especially defensively. When moves like Ice Beam and Flamethrower are coming out, that's not helpful to have a specially defensive grass type in the back. But if I need to tank a neutral close combat, or even better if I have poison typing, or if I need to tank some other neutral hits, the grass typing is fine. So being a Spadef Pokemon like Virizion is, that's not very valuable. So as its role would suggest of being Spadef tanky, it doesn't really work for the grass type. And physical, as I said before, fighting types are poor defensively and should not really ever be used defensively unless it makes up some really cool kind of combo like bug fighting on Buzzwole, right? If you have a specific combo that makes fighting good defensively, that's fine. The grass fighting doesn't really do that. Mostly you're using this for grass defensively, fighting offensive. Let's talk about opportunity cost. So grass types. If I'm in a tier, if I want to have a grass type on my team, I probably only want one grass type. It's not like steel or fairy or water, where sometimes you might have two or more on a team. You know, sometimes you'll have multiple fire types or grass types because you're running a sun team. This grass type does not have chlorophyll, so that doesn't count. And you don't usually want multiple grass types if you're not running a sun team, because that compounds grass's weaknesses, of which there are quite a few. And although fighting types are pretty cool to have offensively, this is not really that good of an offensive Pokemon anyway. And you'd also have to double up on your fighting type weaknesses, of which there are a good chunk as well. So let's talk about opportunity cost. If I'm going to have this as a grass and fighting type on my team, I'm probably not going to want any other grass or fighting types on my team. In OU, of course this is not an OU level threat. Any of these guys are going to be way better than that. In UU, I'd much rather have Ogerpon. I'd much rather have Sinistcha as a defensive grass type. Hydrapple is a super cool Pokemon and would be much better. Iron Leaves is direct competition. We can see has got much higher attack stat of 130. That's 40 base points higher than Virizion, and only sacrifices a bit of speed. And that speed is usually irrelevant. 100 is the benchmark, and after that it's usually 110. Unless you're, trying to outspeed like Garchomp, which this is still faster than, or Blacephalon or something, right? But that's about it. I would rather have Chestnut over Virizion, and we've already mentioned that. Amoonguss' stock is falling now that it can't run Spore, but it still has Stun Spore, Regenerator, and is annoying as heck. So in terms of being a defensive grass type, Amoonguss definitely wins that. Swing Lilligant has almost the same exact speed stat, much higher attack, and can run Chlorophyll or Hustle, both of which are much more viable than Justified, and give it the extra oomph that it needs to be really actually scary. In NU, now we're starting to see Pokemon that are more the power level of Virizion, but we have to consider the utility. Bramblegast has Rapid Spin, has Strength Sap, has a much better typing, because that Ghost typing helps it to 1, block Rapid Spin, 2, gives it a couple of immunities, is not weak to U-Turn, not that Virizion is, but it's just nice to have a grass type that's not weak to U-Turn. And it has spikes if it wants to run it. It's got all sorts of different options that it can play around with. The Virizion does not have. Breloom is, of course, another direct competitor. And Breloom has Technician, which gives it a lot of oomph that Virizion doesn't have. All of its moves are 50% stronger if it wants them to be. Right? That Technician, Loaded Dice, Bullet Seeds hitting hard. It has Swords Dance, Mach Punch, which, Virizion does not have Mach Punch, and we'll talk about its priority options here in a bit. And it's got Rock Tomb with Technician, which is a fantastic combination for a grass fighting type. Torterra has the Shell Smash. Serena has Rapid Spin again, and is one of the best Rapid Spinners in the tier. And Vileplume, similar to Amoonguss, really annoying defensively, and it's going to do a much better job of being defensive than Virizion. You get down to PU, you got Decidueye, and as a grass type, it's got Defog, which is great utility. I will say Decidueye is not my favorite Pokemon. It is hit or miss depending on how you run it and what the metagame is currently looking like. You can run a physical with Poltergeist, Shadow Sneak, or Spirit Shadow, Sucker Punch, all sorts of cool moves you can run a Decidueye. Definitely has 4 move slot syndrome, and depending on which set you run, it'll either be dead weight or it'll be pretty good. So I'd say Defog is the reason why it's here. And Rotom-Mow, I like better than Virizion. It has a decent speed tier when it's Choice Scarfed, and also I do like its dual typing better than Virizion's. Venusaur, not a big fan when it doesn't get Sun, but I would say that it's better being defensive because it has the better defensive typing. And Wo-Chien is in a similar boat. And Wo-Chien is more annoying, right? It's got its Ruination move, which chips down any Pokemon. It's got Leech Seed, Stun Spore, things like that, and a really good ability. So it's good at being fat. When we get down to ZU, of course, there's a whole host of grass types, but if we just pick out a couple of them, notice, by the way, how many grass types are down here. Grass is a bad typing overall. It has its time and place, and of course certain grass types are really good, but it actually has a lot of weaknesses and usually not a lot of offensive utility. So grass overall is actually not a typing I would want to have on my Pokemon if I had my druthers. But Arbalava, I would say, is better. It enables train shenanigans and is really strong, right? 125 base attack. Of course, Dipplin is one of the best Pokemon in ZU, so can't forget about that when we're talking defensive. Decidueye has an incredibly busted move, and the only reason it's not more broken is because of that base 60 speed stat. Leafeon is the matchup fisher. You just run that on a manual Sun and sweep teams. Same with Sawsbuck and Scovillain. Crazy to see that Shaman is down here. Base 100 across the board. It's all the way down in ZU. Toedscruel has Rapid Spin and decent typing. And Whimsicott, I love Whimsicott. Great Pokemon with all sorts of moves that it can run. So these are all the grass types that in ZU you'd have to compete against. And they're definitely feeling, in terms of power level, similar to Virizion. Ever since NU, really. But we still haven't found a tier where Virizion is like, oh, I gotta run this Pokemon. It really brings something to the team. Alright, let's compare it to fighting types now. Maybe I don't want to run any grass types. Maybe none of those grass types do anything for my team, and I can fill it out with other guys. What about fighting types, though? Am I going to be competing with fighting types? Well, obviously in OU, you have 3 of the best Pokemon ever invented. Zamazenta maybe not one of the best Pokemon ever invented, but it's an OU for some reason, and it's doing really well in OU at the very least. Iron Valiant, of course, is a fantastic Pokemon. Great Tusk is an amazingly fantastic Pokemon. You're not competing with any of these. Same with anything in UUBL. Those are just too offensively powerful to keep up with. In UU, you've got your brothers Cobalion and Keldeo, and they are already beating you either from typing or better stat distribution. Okidogi is good at being bulky physically and dishing out a lot of damage. Much better at being a fighting type, especially because it has Drain Punch. Quaquaval is a scary sweeper with Moxie. Hawlucha, of course, is much better than you. Either it's running the Mold Breaker Defog in OU, got the Unburden set. Even though it's not very good in OU, definitely better than Virizion. Chestnut, we've already talked about why Chestnut is better than Virizion. Conkeldurr is much stronger, Slithering is much stronger and has better typing. Terrakion has that better stat distribution again, with the attack stat being boosted. Zapdos, much stronger, and has Defiant, which is a really useful ability, as opposed to Justified, which is not a useful ability. Gallade, now that it has Sharpness, is much stronger, and I would much rather run Gallade as a breaker over Virizion. Lilligant, the same thing. Lucario has better priority options, especially because it has Nasty Plot, and we'll talk more about Nasty Plot in a bit. Breloom we already discussed. Heracross has that better typing of bug fighting as opposed to grass typing. Infernape is an interesting comparison. So let's look at Infernape here for a second. I want to talk about Infernape specifically because it has that same 100 base speed. And so that's why I actually put Virizion with the Choice Scarf as one of the sets, because I think Infernape with the Choice Scarf has been a classic since Gen 4. But this gen specifically, people have been complaining about how Infernape just does not get the job done. Even in Enyo, it doesn't get the job done. It's just too weak with 104 base attack, which is stronger than the base 90 attack stat. So people are complaining about Infernape, who has U-Turn, who has Nasty Plot and Sword Stance, who has all sorts of priority moves and coverage moves, and a stronger offensive typing. If they're complaining about that, well then how are you going to justify Virizion? What does Virizion have that Infernape doesn't? And so I do want to mention that specifically. Alright, let's go back down here. We've got Mienshao, the best fighting type in the tier. It's got U-Turn Regenerator, which is really valuable. You've got Paldean Tauros with Intimidate, which is good, and it's much stronger, and even has Raging Bull for some level of utility if that's something you're looking for. Toxicroak goes up and down in viability, but if water types become more of a problem, it becomes more viable. And then Flamigo with the Scrappy and the better typing with the Flying Fighting. That's PUBL. I would say I would still rather run that than Virizion. Once you get down to PU, Again, now we're starting to talk. Him on top, though, has Rapid Spin and the Technotop combo with the Rapid Spin, Mach Punch, Triple Axle. Much more scary offensively. Palmot has 2 really nice abilities, 3 really nice abilities actually, and has the Revival Blessing. So hard to compete with that. Scrafty has a lot of different toys it can play with. So, you always have to justify putting Scrafty on your team depending on how the metagame is shaping up. But it's definitely a suitable option compared to Virizion. And then we got the other Paldean Tauros here. Once we get down to Zeo, I think we do have some argument to be made that it's about as good as some of the fighting types. Hariyama as a fighting type is incredibly scary because it can tear, steal, and sweep your team real fast. And Embor, of course, is really good, but I would say Embor is a commitment and only is good when you're trying to break down fat, because into HO, it doesn't really do that well. Those defensive stats are pretty bad. Alright, we get down to Zeo, and Crabominable is only good on Trick Room. Phalanx is a meme. Like, some of these Pokemon you're definitely better than. And I think that Virizion should be more used than a lot of these. Pissimian, for a long time, was an NU staple. I think it's probably better than Virizion. And I might even want to use normal for Paldean Tauros just because it still has Intimidate, it still has a great stat spread, and it does get some decent coverage. But I do think Virizion should be considered in Zeo as a valid fighting type. But then you have to consider what it can do for you. And so let's talk about some sets that Virizion can run. So Virizion, because it has this 90-90, can either run physical or special with equal ease or lack of ease because it's only 90-90. That's really weak. So let's talk about the sets. It does get Sword Stance, which is really good. And if you got your Dual Stab here, Close Combat Leaf Blade is about as good as you can want on a grass type, fighting type. I would say that Drain Punch as an option here would be real nice. Right, if you turn this into Drain Punch and you give me Iron Fist or Tough Claws, imagine this with Tough Claws. Virizion with Drain Punch, Tough Claws, or Close Combat Tough Claws and Leaf Blade, or you give me Sharpness. If you gave Virizion Sharpness, and then I can run Sacred Sword Leaf Blade, now we're cooking with gas. But Justified is just not that good. I have to switch in on a Dark type move. Usually that means switching in on Knockoff. Sometimes Dark Pulse, but usually it means switching into Knockoff, which means now I've lost my Life Orb. In which case, did I really win the exchange, especially if they have a good wall that forces me out the next turn and then I lose that boost? And so that's not that great. Last slot, you have a few coverage options. Stone Edge I like here though, because it's good for the flying types that are otherwise going to completely just wall you. And so, same with Breloom, where it runs Rock Tomb in its last slot. Stone Edge is fine here. It's just that 80% accuracy is always going to come back to bite you. And if you want to use this on your team, you're going to have to be resigned to the fact that 20% of the time, you're going to lose the interaction. And it's going to cost you the game. Okay, let's talk about an offensive special Virizion here. Virizion does get Vacuum Wave now, and I think this is something that's overlooked. If you think about Virizion versus Breloom, Breloom comes to mind as being superior because it has Mach Punch. Well, it has Technician Mach Punch and a much higher attack stat. Virizion doesn't have Technician, and it doesn't have a high attack stat, but it does have a priority option in Vacuum Wave. Now, if it had Nasty Plot, that would be something to talk about. I do think that if Virizion got Nasty Plot, that it wouldn't be falling out of the bottom of Zeo. I don't know if it would be PU or where it would be, but I don't think it would be falling out the back of Zeo because +2 Vacuum Wave right off the rip, that's not too shabby. You have Giga Drain as coverage here. Problem with Giga Drain is it's really weak, only 75 base power. So if you want to run that 90 base power Energy Ball, be my guest. But you're not getting your recovery. So you win some, you lose some. In the last slot, I have to put a Terra Blast because you don't have any special coverage, really. You're going to run an Air Slash? I'm running Terra Blast Ice on this specifically because you want to run it against things like Altaria or against Dipland. And so that Terra Blast Ice actually is pretty decent, but then that means that this is going to be a Terror Hog, which isn't really what you want to see from your guy either. It would be better if they could function to their fullest, or almost to their fullest, without Terror. The Subcall Mind set for Virizion, I don't know what exactly it should be, but Subcall Mind Giga Drain has been a set since like Gen 5 or something. I don't really think it's that good though, because you just have mono Giga Drain, or Giga Drain plus like what, Aura Sphere maybe? And you're just gonna get walled out by so many things. You're not gonna do any damage. Let's I guess we'll look at the tiers later. And we'll do some calcs then. You just don't do any damage with this set. It doesn't threaten anything. So if we look at this, like if you had Leech Seed, then you'd have something, right? But you don't have Leech Seed. So you can't even threaten passive chip. Finally, we have a Choice Scarf set. Like I said before, this Pokemon is very similar to Infernape. It's the same exact speed stat, and the 108 Scarf in the lower tiers is pretty decent. Close Combat Leaf Blade, nice and decently powerful. Zen Headbutt for the poisons, and Stone Edge for the flyings. It is what it is. But you're still coming off that 90 base attack stat and no way to boost it on this. So I don't think this set is particularly good. So, next thing I want to do is go over some of the tiers. Let's just assume we're going to start in NU. Everything above NU is too powerful for Virizion. In which tier could Virizion find usage? Let's look at NU. There are certain Pokemon that it would do well against. Okay, Bramblegast is a problem because it blanks both of your dual stabs, so you have to run that Terra Blast Ice like I was saying before if you want to hit it at all. You do outspeed it unless it's got a Rapid Spin up, so that's nice. But you're not going to take its hits very well because you're a Spidef Pokemon, not a Fizdef Pokemon. A lot of Pokemon are going to outspeed you like Chinchino and just completely annihilate you. Dragalge is not a popular Pokemon at the moment, but if it ever becomes a popular Pokemon, it's just going to eat all your hits. You got to run Zen Headbutt for it, which I suppose you could do. Espeon will outspeed you. Scarf Flygon outspeeds you. While you and I don't know who threatens whom in this situation. It's like a mutually assured annihilation. But I think Flygon probably comes out in the end, because if we look at the damage, Flygon here, let's just say it's the Choice Scarf set, right? So it's locked into Outrage. 2 it KOs you. None of your moves, even Life Orb boosted, OHKO it. And so that's not fun. I suppose if you were the Choice Scarf version, that could be something, right? If we just look at Virizion, Choice Scarf, 2 it KOs Flygon and outspeeds it. So if they lock into Outrage and don't have Fire Punch, then I guess you would win that interaction. Gligar, don't even get started on Gligar. Gligar, and your physical wall, you do no type of damage. Let's look at the physically offensive set. At +2, you're doing barely half. Now, Gligar doesn't get Roost right now. If it did, it wouldn't be NU. But it'll just Toxic you, and then you're dead. Or it'll just get a slow U-turn out into a faster Pokemon, of which they'll almost assuredly have a faster Pokemon. We just look at one, for example, Mienshao. Alright, we're gonna go into my Scarf Mienshao. Close Combat, almost one-shots. And heaven help you if I got Triple Axle. Because they're not running Stone Edge right now. They're running the Triple Axle. And that just blows out of the water. So, they got a slow U-turn into the Mienshao, you're dead. You have to switch out. Something like Heracross, not going to like to see that either. Something like Incineroar means the Scarf set is going to be a lot less viable because maybe I'm in on my Vaporeon or something. If you lock into Leaf Blade or Zen Headbutt or whatever, now you're toast. Incineroar comes in. Of course, Close Combat is a problem, but there's other things in the tier that can handle that. Kilowattrel outspeeds you and kills you probably. Although I guess I'd have to double check that because you do have decent Spidef. And Kilowattrel is not that strong. But I'm pretty sure Hurricane just kills you. Yes. So, Muck. Muck is an interesting Pokemon in this matchup because we have said it can run physical or it can run special. If you run physical at +2, your close combat kills, and that's great. We like to see that. Let's say your offense is special though. You don't do anything. So, if Muck is a popular Pokemon in the tier, that's going to force it to run physical. But you know what else is another popular Pokemon in this tier? It's Slowbro Galar. Maybe not super popular on the ladder, but you run into that. Doesn't matter what you're running. You're just going to get completely walled out by Slowbro. Screamtail, likewise. Takes no type of damage. If you're trying to set up, it'll Encore you, and it can Psynoise you, and it can Dazzling Gleam you. Staraptor, I guess, if it's Choice Scarf and you're not, it'll kill you. And Sylveon, probably don't want to run into that either. Although if you're physical, it's less of a problem. Right, because if we're NU Wish, Hyper Voice is a 2-shot. And if I'm a +2, my Leaf Blade is not even going to OHKO you. But it does give the Sylveon something to think about, at the very least. And if they're chipped, I guess +2 Leaf Blade does kill. Or if you get the crit. But, and then of course you got Vileplume down here, right? So if you're running in NU, I think your last move should probably be Zen Headbutt and not the Stone Edge. But it's tricky either way. Could you run a Virizion in NU? I think the answer to that is yes. You could run Virizion in NU. The problem is that what do you lose by doing that? Fighting types. We already talked about Mienshao being one of the best in the tier. You lose out against Paldean Tauros, which is also really good, and Breloom, which I think is a better option still than Virizion. And with grass types, we have the Serena or Brambleghast, so if you wanted those as your rapid spinners, well, now you're out of luck. It's not looking great, and I think that what we showed here is that, okay, Slowbro is a wash. Can't do anything about that. And Gligar is problematic, but you just have to bring in Virizion later in the battle, right? You don't bring it out right away. It's a sweeper, not your breaker. That's fine. I understand that. But when the Mienshao just comes out and one-shots you, and when you've got Terra Ghost Porygon Z's, and you've got Scarf Typhlosions, and when you've got Vileplumes that do not care about you being physically attacking, you've got to wonder if it's still really the best option, right? And I think the answer to that is, not really. Let's look at the PU tier. Look at the PU tier, we start off with Altaria, already off to a bad start. That's why we got to run that Terra Blast Ice. Arcanine's got Intimidate, so physical set's looking harder. Belly Bolt is here, that makes the physical sets more difficult. Colossal is annoying, because Colossal usually runs some kind of mixed defenses, right? So PU defensive, this one's running max Spadef right here. So yeah, my close combat will send it sideways, but I, one, have to be +2, otherwise I don't even OHKO a 0 or I guess 8 defense investment. So that's a problem. And if I look at the special set, I would have to run Aura Sphere or Focus Blast to actually do any type of damage. Even if I'm +2, my Giga Drain, my Vacuum Wave are not doing anything. So I'd have to run a physical set with a Colossal. Again, I could drop Terra Blast for the Aura Sphere or Focus Blast. I could drop the Vacuum Wave, but then I have no priority. And I guess I could drop Giga Drain, but then I have no recovery, and I've lost my other stab. So, Colossal is a major problem for you if you're special. Even though we just got done talking about how these guys beat the physical set pretty easily. Goodra is going to beat you if you're a special set. Got Salazzle, which beats you unless you have Stone Edge. Because it's going to be as a poison type, it's going to beat grass and it's going to beat fighting. which is why offensively grass fighting is not that great, because it's walled by poison types. Same with Venusaur. And Wo-Chen can tear to be a pure poison type, which it does frequently, and that's a problem. So I would say PU is actually a worse tier for Virizion than Enyu is, funnily enough. Let's go down to Ziyu now. Ziyu is probably okay for it. You run Stone Edge for Articuno, Stone Edge. So the physical set looks pretty decent here. You have to hit Drift Bloom with Stone Edge. Good luck with that. I don't even know if that kills. Does it kill? Let's find out. Okay, physical. Drift Bloom, Z Defog. Sure, why not? I guess Stone Edge kills the +2. You just have to hit. And then the rest of the tier isn't so bad. You have to worry a little bit about Graphite Eye, I suppose. That's only if it's used, and I don't know what the usage stats look like for it. Miss Magius is annoying. It'll will-o-wisp the physical sets. So Ziyu's not so bad. But now that we've seen what the tiers look like, let's go back to the sets. I think if we look at it, the physical set is the preferred set. It's beating the Mucks, it's beating the Colossals, it's beating a lot of stuff. However, you lose out on the Terrablast Ice, right? If you really like that Terrablast Ice, you could swap out Stone Edge for Terrablast Ice, I suppose. But then, you're going to be a Terra Hog. And you're not going to be able to break through things unless you have that Terra. And I suppose it's also a problem if you're into things like Articuno, although I guess in close combat that. I don't know. Not great. You could also run Terra Fire so that you can't get burned, which I think would be somewhat valuable. But I do think Terrablast Ice is overall better, just based off of the guys that are down here, and a lot of them being 4 times weak to ice themselves when they come in on you. The special set has Vacuum Wave, which is super cool. But look at all those Pokemon that don't care at all about the special set. And they're good Pokemon. It's not like, oh, there's this fringe Pokemon in the tier that you hardly ever see. Alolan Muck, Colossal, a lot of these guys are very, very, very common. So, not that great. But this is basically your only priority. As a physical attacker, you do have one priority move, and that unfortunately is Upper Hand. Upper Hand is cute, but it's not really that great. Grassy Glide does not count as priority because you don't have grassy terrain. And besides that, you don't have any priority. And sometimes you really need that priority. You're not running Trailblaze, that's a gimmick. Defensive special, that's even worse. Like, this set is entirely unviable and should never be considered outside of maybe draft. And if your opponent has no poison types, and no grass types, and no flying types, and no infiltrator Pokemon, and no encore Pokemon, well, then they deserve to lose. Alright, the Choice Scarf set maybe could have some viability because it'll have a surprise factor. Nobody's going to expect it. And if you're playing a more HO metagame, then if all I need to do is come in, kill a guy that's at 60% and outspeed it, then maybe there's something there. But this will not be able to break, and it's going to miss out on a lot of KOs because you're so weak. And you're going to be locked into either a coverage move, which you're not going to get stab on, or you're going to be locked into a move that a Pokemon might want to come in on you, like Dog, right? You come Townstone, just completely shuts you down. It doesn't matter which move you go for. So, being locked into a move isn't necessarily that great. Where at least if you had Swords Dance, you can Swords Dance up, plus your Leaf Blade, gonna do a decent chunk, right? But you can't do that on the Choice Scarf set. So, at the end of the day, I think we've sort of investigated why Virizion is so bad. Maybe for some of you this is news. Maybe for some of you you're saying, yeah, no kidding, I knew this already. What new was learned here? But I think the takeaway is that if you look at some calcs, you know, this physically offensive Virizion could look viable. You could look at it and say, oh wow, look, at +2 it kills all these guys. That's amazing. But when you look at the opportunity cost of running this as a grass Pokemon or as a fighting type, you know, there's tons of fighting types that can have that calc. That's nothing new. And when you look at the fact that I have to run Stone Edge, which is unreliable, or a Terra Blast type, which means that I have to run Terra Blast and Terrastalize in order to get that coverage, suddenly looks a lot worse. Or Move Slot Syndrome means that I don't get to run Synthesis if I want coverage. And it's just way better options as grass types or as fighting types go. And so it's sad to say, but I do think Virizion deserves to be at least PU, if not ZU, and maybe SU even. But I just want to talk a bit about Virizion today and why I think it's so bad. But that'll be all for me today, and I'll catch you guys next time.